to the Disrupt Your Career podcast, brought to you by Claire Harbour
and Antoine Tirant. We're passionate about helping everyone find fulfillment in their work life.
We believe that big, messy, uncharted career changes are inevitable, and it's up to you to decide.
Will you take control and disrupt, or allow yourself to be disrupted?
We wrote the book about it, and now we share here our conversations with other thinkers in this crucial area.
Settle down and get ready to listen to this dose of wisdom.
So, welcome to this edition of the Disrupt Your Career podcast. This time, we're extremely honored to have amongst us John Boudreau, who is an award-winning scientist, futurist, and thought leader. He's recognized worldwide for his work on the future of work. He's the author of many books on human capital, including his last one, Work Without Jobs: How to Reboot Your Organization's Work Operating System, which is going to be launched late next month. And that's co-authored with Ravin Jesuthasan. So John, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's just a pleasure to be here, Claire. Thank you.
Very good. So let's start with the question we always start with, which is to get your version of your own career journey. Your list of roles and publications and achievements is eye-wateringly long and impressive. How did you start out, and what sort of convictions did you have, and how have you made your major decisions along the way?
Well, indeed, Claire. My career history is a fairly easy one to start because very early on, at least it seems that now, very early on, I decided to be an academic, to be in universities. I was a trumpet player and musician before college and tried that a little bit in college. And enjoyed it, but realized that it wasn't a lifestyle I wanted to pursue, and I probably didn't have the talent to really make a living at it or do it at a level that I wanted to do. And at the time in college, I was also in business school, kind of as a fallback and a little bit out of curiosity. And as I proceeded through business school, I realized I was getting quite fascinated. That this was in the late 70s. Quite fascinated by what I was reading about Japanese management systems that were allowing workers to stop the assembly line, Texas Instruments that was now providing immediate feedback to employees. There was a video at the time of that represented the typical management system as a bowling alley where you throw the ball toward the pins and someone puts a black curtain in the middle. So you never see whether the ball hits the pins or not, and they put a manager next to the curtain, and the manager says, good job or bad job. And then, of course, if you lift the curtain and let everyone see what's going on, they have great ideas about what to do. So I got quite fascinated with that. In fact, one of the books was Work in America, I think it was called, by Ed Lawler and Jim O'Toole, and it was about the nature of work and the changes in work. So I went to my professors who were teaching that time. I'm not even sure it was called human resource management. And said, what do you think I should do? And they said they were the first of two really terrific mentors. And they both said, well, being good at school, which you are, doesn't predict much, but it does predict that you'd probably be a good professor. And so if you think that would be a good lifestyle, then you should go to a graduate school where you would get an MBA first, because this profession is going to need to be anchored in business. Very astute for the 70s, rather than going to a psychology department. So Purdue University had a program in which you received a one-year MBA, a standard MBA, but in an accelerated program. And they admitted me with the plan that I would get the one-year MBA and then, of course, stay on and kind of walk between the business school and the psychology department, basically, during my graduate program. And so then I was off and running. I had this human resource degree. Cornell University was probably one of the top 3 places in the world at the Industrial Labor Relations School. And I was fortunate enough to get an offer from them and join my next 2 really important mentors, George Milkovich and Lee Dyer, as well as other faculty there. George and Lee were already icons in the field. They already really knew how the system worked, how the publication system worked, et cetera. And I was fortunate enough then to be writing about something that was quite timely at the time, ways of calculating the benefits of investing in people. And lots of psychology journals were interested in that. And I was fortunate enough, again, to work with really good colleagues. And so that kind of got me to the place where Cornell felt I could be a tenured professor after about 6 years. And then basically was a professor there, pretty much a standard professor role, publishing in journals and teaching my classes. In the 80s, these things called personal computers arrived, and IBM provided a bunch of them to the school, and we created a room of computers. And I was fortunate enough to be asked to teach the first personal computer class on HR. And I had students building programs that did things like pay and staffing and simulating worker movement and all that sort of thing, along with Barry Gerhardt, who has become a terrific colleague. And then in the late 80s, I began to switch more toward companies and business. Again, I was fortunate enough that some large companies asked me to consult. I wasn't very good at it, but they were very generous. And so I began to learn how to do that and how to speak publicly, and became quite fascinated with that connection to organizations. So that during the 90s, I was basically doing a lot of traveling around the world, speaking and doing executive development with a new colleague, Vladimir Putin, who was terrific and world-renowned and very good at placing our facts, getting us passports for the first time and placing us in all corners of the world, particularly Asia. And then as the late 90s approached, it began to be clear that for my wife and I, for personal family reasons, we needed to be west in the United States. And so in about the early 2000s, I began to say maybe instead of no when people asked if I had ever leave Cornell. And Ed Lawler and the faculty at the University of Southern California came up with a wonderful position, partly in a research institute, partly in the classroom. And everyone by then knew who I was and what I was. And they said, look, you'll teach one of the semesters, but the other semester we want you to be free to be out with companies, et cetera. That was about the time Harvard noticed me. A great editor, Melinda Marino, heard what Pete Ramstad and I were working on and basically said, I think there's a book in there if you could get it organized, and really helped us. And that was Beyond HR. And then I was visible as a writer for Harvard to the world. So that opened up speaker bureaus and more consulting. And of course, the Center for Effective Organizations was a terrific platform. And Ed Lawler, now again, the next mentor, was a terrific partner in writing, et cetera. And then Ravin Jesuthasan and I met through a project with Willis Towers Watson, who was a sponsor of the center, and we've written 4 books since then. Let's see, the last big change was in 2019. We had moved to northern New Mexico, my wife and I, because we wanted to explore the idea of semi-retirement. And I was commuting back and forth, teaching my classes from Albuquerque to Los Angeles, about a 2-hour flight, not too bad. But I realized I didn't want that lifestyle. So the dean and I had a talk, and the dean said, I know you've moved. And I said, how about a hybrid approach to my teaching? You know, I might teach 1 week, or I come to campus 1 week, teach 2 weeks. And the dean said, lovely woman, Nandini Rajgopalan, who I've worked with a lot. And she said, you know, John, it'll probably be 5 to 10 years before we have a hybrid offer. We should. I see the logic, but we don't have it at USC. That was approximately May of 2019.
Okay.
And the teaching would have started January. So that's how I got here.
Fantastic. You make it sound marvelously smooth. But also very much dependent on serendipity of meetings and crossing paths and finding the right mentors. And that's a beautiful way of navigating through life and a career.
Indeed.
Definitely.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, you've done research on all kinds of things, and we're not going to be able to go into all of them today, but, you know, the future of work is maybe a nice umbrella category to be thinking about. What do you see as being the main trends around the future of work at this stage? And on the flip side of that, what do you anticipate to be the future of careers?
Well, I think they intersect pretty well. And as you say, there's so many things one could talk about the future of work. As I thought about your wonderful question, these are the words that came to mind: automation, personalization, social transparency, meaning platforms that provide a great deal more information and transparency about the work relationship than we've had, fluidity, which we talk about in the new book. I'll call it atomization, work divided into its atomic parts, and I hope increased empowerment of the worker side of the work relationship. So we can talk about all of those sorts of things, but I think in terms of careers, it means that with automation as well as other things, a career is going to be something where people need to be aware. I like the metaphor that work is now like technology. It's constantly upgraded, meaning that every day, some kind of automation might be able to do some of the tasks that are in your job. It's it's perpetually obsolete in one way, and perpetually new in other ways. And so that automation is one of many trends that cause that to happen. So for a career, I think at this point, people will need to be and are becoming more accustomed to the idea that the work will be changing even as they do it, and that they need to keep an eye on that. They need to continue to qualify for a broad array of things. Personalization will probably mean, I'm hoping, that workers will be able to get the features of work that fulfill them and that satisfy them the most. We're already seeing accelerated with choices around hybrid work, et cetera. But personalization goes much deeper to rewards and the sort of projects one works on, et cetera. Platforms like Glassdoor, Burning Glass, et cetera, even internal company platforms provide a lot more transparency about the career that's available there, about the nature of the people you might work for in terms of ratings, et cetera. And then fluidity and atomization. I think people will need to think of their work not in terms of jobs, but more in terms of the elements of those jobs, and more in terms of floating between things like projects and tasks and that sort of thing.
Excellent. It sounds as though in the most extreme version of that, we would all be cherry picking our careers and only doing the stuff we love. But I guess the reality lies somewhere slightly short of that extreme.
Somewhere short of being forced into a series of jobs because you really must stay with that employer to have security and belongingness and that sort of thing, and being essentially a freelance project worker, either internally or externally to the organization. Exactly, indeed. And maybe movements between those two.
For sure. And so the more agility that we have as individuals to navigate that, the more likely we are to succeed.
And it's really that mindset, exactly, of agile and getting comfortable with agility, comfortable with being told, we just found a robot that can do 30% of your work, and being ready for that and insisting that the organization anticipate that and get you ready before the robot arrives, something like that.
Very nice distinction. So let's talk about your new book. It's got a very long title, but I guess the essence of it is work without jobs, which you've started making an allusion to, and this idea around the whole work operating system is going to need to change. That's launching in a few weeks' time. Let's talk a little bit about the book. Why did you write it? What did you see was the need? And why now? And how did you choose to co-author with this particular person from all the range of amazing people you've worked with?
Well, it's kind of an interesting one. There's honestly a buildup to this book that I realized once we wrote it. I wasn't really quite aware of the history. So I'll work backwards and say that the title, Work Without Jobs, basically says that we need to begin thinking about work and workers and qualifications outside of the traditional boundaries of units, actually, of work is a job, a worker is a job holder, and the qualification is, let's call it a degree. So those are containers. They're the containers that very often the systems in organizations and in society, they're the way we measure work. So when they talk about something like let's say a shortage of nurses in the world, the way you calculate the shortage is you say, I have this many nursing jobs that I project. I have this many fully qualified people to be a nurse, and I calculate the gap between them. And then I go look at colleges that offer nursing degrees, and I ask how many degree holders will they produce, and that's the supply for these jobs that are held by nurses. Well, in fact, in the book, we talk about examples, of course, where healthcare has melted those jobs of nurses, let's say, looked at all the tasks within them, and found that nurses were doing scheduling, automations to do that. Nurses were taking temperatures and checking on relatively stable patients. Even a receptionist can do that. That sort of thing is happening. So that's what the book is about. It's not that people won't have jobs, but it's that we need to, especially I call it at the edges, where work is changing quickly, where we have massive shortages, where there are significant changes in strategies or stakeholders. Very often at those edges, there's certain kinds of work that needs to be melted out of jobs and reconstructed and reinvented. So that's what the book is about. And we call it a new operating system, like a computer operating system, with the idea that in the old operating system, the units were jobs, job holders, and degrees. That's still pretty true. In the new operating system, still to be perfected, we'll have deconstructed tasks and projects floating around, needing someone to do them. Individuals seen as their entire array of capabilities, ready to be matched to some combination of those tasks, projects, etc. And then qualifications or learning seen as the element of the degree, maybe individual classes, maybe experience. And all of those things will be in the new operating system, ready to be combined and recombined as needed. So that's what, when we feel like that's a very fundamental shift in the way an organization would work. But taking the system from jobs, job holders, and degrees to these deconstructed elements that are now recombinable in many different ways. And then I'll just mention the co-authored choice was quite easy because Ravin and I, this will be our fourth book together. We had written a book about work that's done by people who are not your regular employees. In that book, it turns out, the first step had to be deconstruct the work because frequently a contractor or a volunteer or gig worker does not do a whole job. They do a few of the tasks of a job. Same thing with automation. What will automation replace my job? Well, the only way to answer any question like that is to break the job down into its tasks. That's how all the science is done. And then evaluate each task in terms of how automatable it is. Again, what you have is automation does not neatly replace people in jobs. What it does is it changes the work, and you still need those people now in combination with automation. And the only way to see the pattern is to allow the job to deconstruct and say what parts of it are automatable and what parts of it do we still need humans for. So this book is kind of a culmination of that to elevate that notion of deconstruction to the level of a topic of an entire book.
Fantastic. That's really fascinating. Now, I guess you've told us quite a lot already about, how the system might work in practice in a whole sector, like nursing, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Have we got to the stage where you can share any examples of a particular organization that has really applied this approach and made it work?
Yes, we have a number of examples in the book. As I said, one of the examples where we can go right through all the elements of the book is Providence Health, which is the organization I was talking about, and that Greg Till as a CHRO. So that's the nursing example as well as other examples that they did. Yeah, I think you can see this examples, of taking jobs apart pretty much everywhere now. Mm-hmm. When we move people from the office to working at home, that changes the work that they do. That melts the work. There are certain things they did when they were on site, maybe meetings or other things, and now they don't do them. There were certain elements of their work life, commuting back and forth to work, and now they have that part of their work life back. And so how do we allocate that to the tasks of their work? When you change on-site people from something like making auto parts to making respirators, again, we melt the jobs on the production line. We have to reconstruct them around this new, more agile, usually way of making. So COVID, among other disruptions, has, I think, shined a light on and accelerated this notion of deconstructing the work and recombining it. The same thing as workers with atomized capabilities. So probably one of the best examples is the nurses that I talked about, but we also see now platforms in organizations where I call them, I use the term internal talent marketplace. It's not my own term, but that's what I mean. Organizations like Gloat, Eightfold, even some of the standard HR system providers like Workday and others have what they might call an internal marketplace. So everyone's an employee, but a leader can post a project to the platform, and an employee with a regular other job might choose to take on that project in addition to their job, usually in a voluntary way. So that reveals capabilities of people. We hear a lot about skills. So this entire discussion about a skills-based economy, et cetera, I see skills as one element of a worker's capability. Knowledge, skills, and abilities would be the way the standard psychology and HR world would describe that. So those atomized capabilities are becoming much more visible when organizations begin to deconstruct and move to a skills-based system. And many, many organizations, it would be quite easy to find lots of examples. We see using those things, we see situations like an insurance company. They had jobs that were the digital support, and those jobs were divided by, let's say, divisions. So they had digital support in customer service, digital support in application processing, digital support in legal compliance, et cetera. And they realized that digital support needed to float. And so we reinvent digital support, put you into a pool, and then you're constantly reinventing your work to move to and flow to the places where it's needed. And then we also have examples that echo what I talked about before, examples where organizations have brought in workers who are not employees, much more for projects than for an entire job. And then they mix together with the employees there. And again, almost anyone, the data seems to suggest that almost any organization has a significant population, perhaps invisible to HR, being managed by procurement of these additional workers. Sometimes the number is above 50% of the work being done in your organization is these workers who are not on a regular employment contract, and they're often doing projects or tasks in the same way that I talked about the internal marketplace for employees. So this is across the book, insurance companies, oil drilling organizations that have automated their oil drilling rigs, and the work has shifted to being more of a control center, like an air traffic control center that is running the robotic rig, where the experts who can do great repairs and great maintenance can now move from rig to rig virtually, rather than being allocated to one drilling rig at a time, for example.
Those are some stunning examples. They're making me really take stock of that idea that, this is stuff we simply wouldn't have imagined when we were starting off our careers all those years back.
Right.
And I'm thinking that, you're no doubt talking mostly about, the pioneering or the forward-thinking organizations, as opposed to the ones that have not started thinking about this yet. So, if we were to think more in that direction, what are the implications for them, and how should they be starting to adapt, especially the HR leaders, but as a set of leaders, what should they be thinking about and getting started on?
Yeah, it's a very, very good question. And I think the way I answer it basically is that the future is unevenly distributed, I think, is the best quote that I've heard. And so this is not about trying to create this new work operating system or apply it in all of the work in your organization. So a great deal of work is still quite appropriately and easily managed with the traditional work operating system. And that's fine. And it shouldn't be an objective to say, oh, I'm going to force this new work operating system upon leaders and others who might rightfully say, look, the job-based system is working just fine. I think what our point would be is that the job-based system tends to be the default system. And so our invitation is to say, where might you find I call them the edges, where things are already melting? Here's what happens, and then I'll give you some principles from the book. What you hear is something like, we cannot fill these job requisitions. They've been open for months and months and months. No leader is going to come to HR and say, please give me a new work operating system. Perhaps they will after they read the book, but they don't have a language for it. What they know is that we can't fill these jobs because there aren't enough degree holders, et cetera. What HR or others who support them, and hopefully the leaders themselves will soon start thinking is this a signal that I might need to adapt some of the principles and ideas from this new work operating system, like the nursing course? Perfect example. There's a word called functional fixedness, which means thinking of an object only in its traditional use. So a classic example is you're locked out of your home, you don't have your keys, and you think, well, a key is the only way I can get in. But you have this thing called a credit card. That credit card traditionally is a way of making purchases, but it's also a thin piece of plastic that might work as a way to open a lock. And so functional fixedness is always thinking about the traditional jobs, job holders, and degrees. Functional fluidity is saying, is this a moment? We can't fill these requisitions. Another one is we're automating. And I thought automation would neatly replace people in these jobs and then I could redeploy them. But it doesn't. It's only doing part of their job. What you hear from the leaders is, I don't know how to automate. It's very difficult for us to automate. The workers say it's not their job. That's what you hear. And what should go off in your head, I think, is this an opportunity to apply this new work operating system to offer leaders a different way of thinking? And in the book, we talked about a number of those kinds of triggers: constraints, operating challenges, system strategy, automation, etc.
Let's turn back to individuals now. So thinking about this whole person with his or her deconstructed capabilities and not just a job holder, what does that imply for individuals in their careers? And what advice do you have particularly for those starting out in their careers now?
We talked with my daughter when she was growing up. She's now 40 years old. She's a psychotherapist. And she said, "What do you think I'll do?" And she had all sorts of capabilities and skills. And, she was probably 12 years old. And my wife had a beautiful line. She said, I think you're going to do something that hasn't been invented yet. And as it turned out, yes, my daughter is a psychotherapist and she had a fairly typical career of seeing people in an office. Well, COVID happened. Everyone went virtual. And she is now a virtual combination of therapist, speaker, consultant, etc., doing a job that she largely does from a secluded spot in her home. And so what I think that idea of, I love my wife's quote of, what you will do in your career probably hasn't been invented yet. We can't see it yet. And what would that say? Does that mean you're paralyzed? No, but it means you need to adopt decision frameworks that are appropriate for situations where you don't know the future. Things like diversification in investments. We don't know the future, so we invest in a way that any set of futures will produce some kind of return for us. Not everything we invest in will pay off, but some of it will. Same thing with capabilities. Not every capability you invest in is going to be immediately used, but having an array of capabilities against a future that's likely to be changing is a way to diversify your investments, keeping options open in the way that you would with investments. I'm going to buy an option to purchase this if situations work out. That might be a way to get a capability that you might be able to use quickly, or knowing where you can go take a quick course. So that's one. The work you hold in the future has probably not been invented yet. And so think in terms of options, think in terms of diversification. The other one is that your career will probably tap the fuller array of your capabilities, not just those that will be used in a job or a series of jobs. I think organizations will begin to evolve toward a system where it's more like a talent marketplace, where you float among different tasks and projects, working for different leaders, et cetera. So think of yourself as a whole person, the array of capabilities beyond only your employment. Think of your work as being constantly upgraded, just like any technology you're using. There's an upgrade that changes a little bit what you do. Most days it won't matter very much. Some days it's going to be a brand new robot or AI that makes a big change. Pay attention to that evolution of automation. The machine that allowed bank tellers to be remote, the availability of that technology appeared 10 years before we had now virtual bank tellers, virtual bank assistants. Leaders and workers could see that technology coming. What I say to companies is, I'm waiting for the first company to make a pledge to their workers that we'll automate only as fast as we can prepare you. And I think there may be a huge payoff in that, rather than automating fast and laying off workers, but getting workers ready so that they are integrated with the automation. And I think we'd see much greater productivity, fulfillment, et cetera, when workers are ready for the automation, even though you might miss that little first automation capability. Think of credentials as stackable elements. So think less in terms of degrees and more in terms of the elements of qualifications. Ginni Rometty, former CEO of IBM, has an example here that we talk about in the book: cybersecurity engineers. There is simply no way that we can get enough degree-holding cyber engineers to fill the positions that are needed. What she says is, we've overspecified that work. We don't need a full degree. I'll hire 60% qualified people and we'll train them up. So think of it that way. What are you 60% qualified for? in an organization that might be able to provide the other 40%. Think of your network as vital as your position in an organization, the network that spans all the boundaries, and think of the boundaries of your work as permeable. Your organization boundary might be permeable, leave on a sabbatical, be borrowed by a partner company, etc. You may drop off and be a platform worker for a while, or something that looks very much like a platform worker. And we see this happening in organizations. More sabbaticals, more opportunities to get off the track in a consulting firm, but come back and still get credit if you want to go do childcare or the birth of a new child, etc. And then I think there's also get facile, get good with the platforms and the sources of information about work and how it's changing, whether it be LinkedIn, job boards, Burning Glass, et cetera, and whatever evolves in the future, be attentive to those in the same way that you might watch your stock investments every day. What's trending, what's coming up, et cetera.
Fantastic. Now, let's go way back and think about 21-year-old John. What advice do you have for him? What do you wish you'd known when you were that age, and how might that become advice or insight for anyone starting out on a career?
So 21-year-old John is a long way away, of course, and but I'll try and think back, because that would be in the 70s, basically. As I think about that, I mentioned in my career anyway how important mentors were. And at the time, I certainly recognized that these people were being helpful. But I think looking back, when people say, how these achievements of your lifetime, et cetera, I think as I look at it, it's a series of great mentors, really. More than anything else, it was those two professors that said, if you're fascinated about this, it's called human resources, and first, get an MBA. That was a defining element of the way I see the world, the way, what makes, in some cases, what makes me different or special is that I do have that MBA. It's not that I'm an expert, but I understand what MBAs understand about finance, marketing, et cetera, in addition. Then there were the mentors at Cornell, George Milkovich, Lee Dyer, who helped me understand what it is to have an academic career, how to publish, how that system works, et cetera, as well as being very good friends and people I could talk to honestly about insecurities, et cetera. Ed Lawler, same kind of thing. He was so brilliant at creating this wonderful position for me at the University of Southern California. So for me anyway, I would say your career is going to be a series of pivotal mentors, and recognize them, nurture them, appreciate them. And so really, and I mean this honestly, my career is a product of the extraordinary good fortune of being able to have great people who were generous enough to offer me good ideas. I often say that my job is to talk to brilliant HR leaders who are doing the hard work and the creativity, and then I write about it. And then people like you say, we'd love to have John on our podcast because he's so creative and insightful, So that's one. I think also taking leaps is going to be your moment of greatest growth. And as you said, my career is fairly straightforward. I never spent any time being homeless, touring the world on a freighter, that sort of thing. But nonetheless, what I find is things that were difficult, things that were scary, often I look back, and if I was successful, they were elements of the greatest growth. I think sometimes I ask myself, people say I regret that I wasn't more adventurous, that I didn't take more risks. And I think for me, I always wonder, well, what if I had taken all those risks and they hadn't worked out? Would I still say I regret not taking more risks? But I will say I grew through the scary part. And the other one is, I think most people want to achieve, and I think they want to devote themselves to work and to moving ahead in something like a career. And that's important, and certainly that's a part of my value system. However, I also think, and maybe this is getting a little older, Claire, looking back, when I took time to be with my daughter, time to be with my family, it turned out there was enough time for that. It may have felt like, oh my goodness, the emails are going to pile up, or this paper won't get written, or whatever. And looking back, there was almost always enough time. And it turned out that the achievement part did happen. So I think there's, putting a priority on things that are not my career was indeed a good idea, even though it felt sometimes as if it might compromise things.
Absolutely. That's a beautiful insight. Thank you. If you had a magic wand and you could change just one thing about today's world of work, what would it be?
So I think if you ask about my convictions, Claire, I think my hope is that now or in the past or eventually, I'll make a humble contribution to making the work relationship better. There's so many instances in which workers have ideas, information, insights that if only leaders and the people who are contracting for the work, if only they knew them, things would be better. And that's why I got fascinated in the early days with management that allowed the workers to stop the assembly line, et cetera. So number one, I'm hoping that in my humble way, the work relationships will be better. I think the other thing that's fundamental to me is I would like to see work relationships, organization principles, the general arena of decisions about people and organizations be as rigorous and accountable as things like money and markets. And Pete Ramstead and I, of course, wrote a lot about that in the book Beyond HR. We're still very far away from holding every leader accountable for their people in the way that we hold them accountable for their money. And that requires a maturing of both the HR discipline, more rigorous, more scientific, more agreed fundamental principles, and also the profession of HR that is equipped in the way that the finance profession naturally equipped itself. But finance is, of course, a much older profession, and they went through all of these stages. But I'd love to see a profession of HR that is credible and rigorous enough that line leaders or other leaders are held as accountable for people as they are for money, and that HR is capable of supporting those leaders so that that accountability is in the right direction.
Amen.
Thank you.
Just before we finish up, would you like to give your book a shameless plug?
Well, sure. It's really pretty easy. It's a long title if you read the whole thing, but just think Work Without Jobs. And Ravin, bless his heart, has put together a beautiful website called workwithoutjobs.com. So Fantastic. You can search on that. And at that website, you'll find excerpts and everything you need to know about the book. And I will deeply appreciate it if people take a look. And there's places there to pre-order the book as well. The physical book with supply chain issues looks like it's now due in late March or early April, but pre-orders are available as well now. So thank you so much for the opportunity to plug the book, so to speak.
For sure. And we always publish links to those websites and the crucial places where you can buy. So very
Great.
Good. John, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on. My head is reeling from so many different things to think about.
In a good way, I hope.
Absolutely. And the fact that, you know, this rather structured scientific view that you're taking so easily sits alongside the stuff we've known all along about why people should be agile and why organizations should be seeing people as a package of very separate and not necessarily totally linked, but unique experiences that make them so valuable. So
yes, we owe a lot to your work on the idea of disruptive careers. And I agree with you. The compatibility here is just about perfect. Your ideas and the ideas in the book fit together beautifully. So thank you for all the contributions you've made.
Isn't it wonderful? John, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. And
thank you, Claire.
We will get this out very soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed hearing from this month's guest as much as we did.
Do go and check out our work on disrupt-your-career.com and come back soon. Thank you.